A young gymnast walks into practice on a Friday night, doing the same move she has done 1,000 times, and 2 days later, she is gone. Across the world, a 19-year-old boy flies to Russia, chasing his Olympic dream, falls into a foam pit that was supposed to keep him safe, and spends 12 days fighting for his life in a hospital far from home. What is it about this sport that keeps stealing the futures of the very athletes who love it most? The chalk dust hung in the air like a thin white cloud on the evening of November 8th, 2019, inside a gymnastics facility in New Haven, Connecticut. The lights were bright and steady, the equipment was familiar. The air smelled the way it always did: chalk, worn leather, the faint tang of rubber mats that had absorbed 10,000 landings over the years. It was a Friday night, and Melanie Coleman was at practice, which was the most normal thing in the world for her. She had been coming to gyms like this since she was small enough to need a boost to reach the low bar. Gyms were where she felt most herself. They were where she made sense. Melanie was 20 years old and a junior at Southern Connecticut State University in New Haven. She was studying to become a nurse. She was a team captain. She had earned all-state honors at Jonathan Law High School in Milford, Connecticut, where she had led her team to a second-place finish at the state championships. When she arrived at Southern Connecticut State as a freshman, her older sister Tiffany was already on the gymnastics squad, and the two of them competed side by side the way they had done everything together, close, inseparable. That was the word her mother, Susan, used. Inseparable. Her family was large and warm and loud in the best way, and Melanie was the thread that made every gathering feel complete. She had worked at this sport for more than a decade. She had climbed all the way to level 10 in the USA Junior Olympics program, the highest level a young gymnast could reach before the collegiate ranks. That climb took years of early mornings and sore muscles and moments of doubt that she pushed through every single time. Her longtime personal coach, Naufal Al Bari, had known her for 10 of those years. He had coached her 2 older sisters before her. He had watched Melanie grow from a little girl who cartwheeled with pure joy into a young woman of rare character and real skill. When Melanie got old enough, Alberti hired her to teach children at his gymnastics business in Hamden. She coached little kids on weekends. She hosted birthday parties for children just learning what it felt like to fly. That was Melanie's nature. She was always reaching towards someone else, always trying to be the person who made things better for the people around her. USA Gymnastics named her an All-America Scholar Athlete. The Women's Collegiate Gymnastics Association called her a Scholastic All-American. Her head coach at Southern Connecticut, Mary Fredericks, described her as an incredibly hard worker and a sweet-spirited young woman. Her former coach, Jerry Nelson, who had recently retired from the program, said she was an extraordinary young lady who positively touched everyone she met. These were not the words people use to fill space at a memorial. These were the words people use when they are trying to describe someone whose absence creates a shape in the room that no one else can fill. The uneven bars sit at the heart of women's artistic gymnastics. 2 steel bars, one higher than the other, set nearly 9 feet and about 5.5 feet from the ground. Athletes grip the bars and swing in long, sweeping arcs, building speed with their own bodies, releasing into the air above, spinning or twisting before catching the bar again. The timing has to be exact. The grip has to be solid. The angle of every release has to match the angle of every catch, or the whole sequence collapses. A gymnast on the uneven bars is always a fraction of a second away from a perfect routine and a fraction of a second away from a dangerous fall. The foam pit below the bars in training settings is supposed to catch what goes wrong. It is supposed to be the margin of safety that lets athletes push their limits without paying the full price of a mistake. On the night of November 8th, Melanie was performing what Naufal Al Bari later described to reporters as a routine training exercise. Not a new skill, not something she was attempting for the first time. A routine exercise, the kind she had done so many times that her body knew the sequence without her having to think through each step. There was nothing in the air that night that said this was different. There was no moment of hesitation, no signal that something was wrong before it was wrong. The gym was quiet the way training gyms are quiet. Not silent, but focused. The background noise of a place where serious work is being done. And then Melanie slipped. Her hands came off the bar and her body fell. And the angle was wrong and the impact reached her spine before anyone in that building could do a single thing to stop it. Emergency responders arrived quickly. She was taken to Yale New Haven Hospital, where doctors assessed the damage and understood immediately how serious it was. Her coaches were shattered. Her teammates stood in the gym and tried to understand what had just happened to one of the people they loved most. Her family rushed to the hospital. Her mother, Susan, who had described her children as inseparable, sat in a waiting room with the rest of her family and did the only thing any of them could do. They waited. For 2 days, Melanie Coleman fought. The gymnastics community gathered online in stunned silence, leaving messages and prayers and expressions of disbelief. The University of Washington gymnastics program tweeted that the sport was with Southern Connecticut. Kathy Johnson Clark, an Olympian from the 1984 Los Angeles Games, said she was heartbroken for Melanie's family and teammates. Every coach, every athlete, every parent who had ever sent a child to a gym and trusted that the equipment and the training would keep them safe, all of them felt this. All of them waited with the Coleman family, even from a distance, even without knowing her name before that weekend. What does a family do when the phone rings on a Sunday afternoon and the news on the other end is the one they have been dreading since Friday night? Don't go anywhere, because what comes next is the moment nobody in that hospital was ready for, and it will change the way you see this sport forever. Hit subscribe so you don't miss a single story on this channel. On Sunday, November 10th, 2019, Melanie Coleman died at Yale New Haven Hospital. She was 20 years old. 2 days after a routine training session, 2 days after a slip that lasted less than a second, the light and love of the Coleman family was gone. The university released its statement that same afternoon. Jay Moran, the athletic director at Southern Connecticut State, said it had been devastating to her coaches and teammates. President Joe Bertolino said the school's deepest sympathies were with her family and friends, and that her coaches and professors had described Melanie as a special young woman who excelled in both the classroom and the gym. Mary Fredericks, the head coach who had worked alongside her, said the team would miss her greatly, though she would always be with them. These were official words from official people, and they were true, but they did not come close to the size of what the Coleman family had lost. Susan Coleman told reporters she was going to leave an empty space in the family's photographs from now on. She said it simply, like a decision she had already made, like something she needed everyone to understand. There would always be a space for Melanie. Thomas Alberti spoke to reporters with the quiet grief of a man who had spent a decade watching someone grow into something remarkable and then watched it end in a single evening. He said the fall was a complete accident. He said Melanie was not at fault. He said that to know her was to like her, and that she had a desire to help everyone around her, and that the thing that made her a great gymnast was the exact same thing that made her a great person. He had coached her for 10 years. He had hired her to teach the little ones. He had watched her become the kind of role model that children's parents pointed to and said, "Be like her." And now he was standing in front of cameras trying to explain to the world why she was gone. Her family agreed to donate her organs. Even in death, Melanie Coleman was still the one reaching out, still the one trying to make something better for someone else. The family's statement said her spirit, her laughter, and her humor would live on through the people who loved her and through the gift of life she gave to those who needed it most. Within 2 days of the news breaking, strangers who had never met Melanie, who had only read her name for the first time on a sports website or a local news station, donated more than $53,000 to a GoFundMe campaign set up for the Coleman family. They gave because something about her story reached them somewhere deep, because she was 20 years old and she was going to be a nurse, and she loved coaching little kids, and she was inseparable from her family, and none of that should have ended on a Friday night in November in a gym in New Haven. The gymnastics community grieved loudly and together. Programs from across the country posted tributes. Coaches and athletes who had never competed against Melanie or met her in person sent messages to her school and her family. The sport is small in the way that tight communities are small. Everyone knows someone who knows someone, and when one of them falls, the loss radiates outward in every direction. Flow Gymnastics called the news devastating. The University of Washington said the gymnastics world was with Southern Connecticut. Kathy Johnson Clark said she was heartbroken for the entire gymnastics family, and they all were, every single one of them. The uneven bars were not changed. No rule was rewritten in the immediate aftermath. What Alberti told reporters was true. It was a complete accident, the kind that cannot always be prevented by better equipment or stricter protocols. The sport acknowledged that truth with the uncomfortable honesty it required. Gymnastics is dangerous. Lethal injuries are rare, but rare does not mean impossible. And the foam pit, and the crash mats, and the safety protocols that have been built up over decades cannot account for every angle, every grip, every fraction of a second miscalculation that sends a body in the wrong direction. Melanie Coleman's death was not the result of recklessness. It was the result of a sport that demands physical precision that the human body can only achieve most of the time. Not always, not every time. Her sister Tiffany had competed alongside her at Southern Connecticut. Now Tiffany would return to a gym where the other half of her team was missing. Her coaches would walk into practice and feel the shape of her absence. The little children who had learned cartwheels from Melanie at Alberti's gym in Hamden would keep growing up not knowing what they had briefly been given. The family would leave that empty space in every photograph. And 6 years later, and 8,000 miles away, in a cold training hall in a Russian city most people had never heard of, a 19-year-old boy from East Java was about to make his own family understand exactly what the Colemans had felt in that hospital waiting room in New Haven. He had traveled to Russia to train for the biggest competition of his young life. He had a foam pit beneath his high bar, the same kind of cushion that was supposed to make the dangerous moments survivable. He did not know yet that he would need it to survive at all. Was the sport that had taken Melanie Coleman about to take someone else? It was September 1st, 2025, and Naufal Al Bari stepped into the Berdizi Palace of Sports in Penza, Russia, carrying everything he had worked toward since childhood. He was 19 years old, from East Java, Indonesia, and he was considered the brightest young gymnast his country had produced in a generation. He had arrived in Penza with 4 teammates and 2 coaches, the whole group supported by Indonesia's Ministry of Youth and Sports, sent to Russia specifically to prepare for the 53rd FIG Artistic Gymnastics World Championship scheduled for October in Jakarta, on their home soil, in front of their own people. This was the moment Indonesian gymnastics had been building toward. Naufal was supposed to lead them into it. 3 months earlier, he had competed at the Asian Championships in South Korea, his first major international debut, performing on the floor exercise and the pommel horse. The chairperson of Indonesian gymnastics, Ita Yuliadi, called him a talented young athlete and a good person. He had been projected for the 2025 Southeast Asian Games in Thailand, and beyond that, the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics. Indonesia had only qualified its first ever Olympic gymnast the previous year, when Rifda Irfanalutfi made the Paris 2024 Games. Naufal was supposed to be the second. He was supposed to be the proof that Indonesian gymnastics had truly arrived. On September 13th, 2025, 12 days into the training camp, Naufal was working on the high bar. He attempted a complex release element, the kind of skill that requires absolute precision at the moment of letting go, and the landing into the foam pit went wrong. The director of the Berdzi facility told Russian state media that the athlete had a bad fall into the foam rubber-lined pit. The impact reached his neck. Russian personnel rushed him immediately to G.A. Zakarin Hospital in Penza, where neurosurgeons began working on an injury that had already changed everything. The Indonesian embassy in Moscow was contacted. The federation in Jakarta began coordinating from thousands of miles away. His family was told. His 4 teammates kept training. What no one wanted to say out loud in those first hours was the thing everyone already feared, that a foam pit in a training hall in Russia had failed to save a 19-year-old boy from East Java who had done nothing wrong except try to be great. For 12 days, Naufal Al Bari fought inside G.A. Zakarin Hospital. Doctors worked. The federation coordinated. His family traveled to Russia to be near him. On September 25th, 2025, he died. He was 19 years old. He had gone to Penza to prepare for a world championship on his home soil. He never saw Jakarta again. Russian investigators opened an examination into the equipment and conditions at the Berdzi facility, looking into whether anything had failed to meet required safety standards. No autopsy was performed. His family requested that his body be prepared according to Islamic tradition before being flown home, and the Federation spent a week finding a burial company in Penza capable of carrying out the proper rites. When Naufal's body finally arrived in Indonesia, he was laid in repose near Soekarno-Hatta Airport before being returned to Gresik, the city where his family waited for him. His 4 teammates in Penza kept training. They competed at the World Championships in Jakarta weeks later, at a venue the Federation said would stand as a tribute to his spirit. Melanie Coleman slipped from a bar in Connecticut and was gone in 2 days. Naufal Al Bari fell into a foam pit in Russia and was gone in 12. 2 athletes, 2 countries, 1 sport, the foam pit, the crash mat, the chalk on the hands, the years of practice, none of it is ever enough of a guarantee. Gymnastics asks everything from the people who love it, and sometimes, without warning, in an ordinary training session on an ordinary day, it takes everything back.